Well, hello xenographers everywhere, and today we have for you a pair of Russian beauties. These are a pair of Kiev 4As. So the Kiev 4A is a rangefinder camera, and it has quite an interesting history. It's unlike most or much of the rest of Russian rangefinder production in that it's not based on the Leica. In fact, what the Kiev is an exact copy of the Contax II, the German pre-World War II camera, the Contax II. And in fact, it's more than just a copy. There's an interesting story behind how these cameras came into existence, which is that at the end of World War II, the Russian forces were legitimately given the entire, pretty much the content of the entire Contax factory as war reparations. So the whole tooling, the whole machinery, the whole manufacturing base of these cameras, in fact, was on the Contax II machines, originally made by the Contax company in Germany. And so what we have here is a very, very precise rendition of the actual Contax cameras. So if you're a Robert Capa fan, or if you just love the old Contax style, these are very, very nice cameras to get into. They're extremely well made, in my experience. I will add that as a qualifier, because I have heard of some later models towards the end of the production run were not made terribly well. And in fact, there's a story, I don't know if it's true, but there's a story of some officials arriving at the Kiev plant in the mid-80s, and the quality had by that time become so bad, so the story goes, that the entire production run was put into a number of trucks and carted away to the city dump. Whether that's true or not, I really don't know. But what I can say is that these two models are very, very nicely made. This is an earlier model. This camera dates from 1960. It has a lens from the mid-70s on it, a Jupiter 8, so pretty much exactly the same lens that's used on a lot of the Zorki cameras, sometimes finds its way onto the Fed cameras, except that in this case the lens is in Contax mount, so it's very different, at least in construction. So this model's from 1960 and this model is from 1975. So they're separated by 15 years. However, the quality seems to me to be pretty much identical on both of these cameras. I don't think there is really too much difference in them. There are detailed differences. The earlier camera has a body covering, which is quite thin, and it doesn't have too much texture on it. It also has a self-timer lever that's rather different. The later one, you can see, has this little bit of black plastic on it, which brings the whole camera immediately bang up to date. Not, as it's still a copy of the 1930s Contax. And the body covering is actually rather coarser grained on the later example, though it's still very nice. So one of the differences on this camera that makes it very different to the Leica-based cameras is the long base rangefinder. So you can see there's a very large distance here between the viewfinder and the rangefinder windows, and that's carried over on both models. And what that means is that the rangefinder should at least theoretically speaking, and I'm sure in practice be a lot more accurate. Focusing is rather different to the Leica style cameras. What we actually do with one of these old Kievs, I'll demonstrate now. What we actually do with one of these old Kievs is the focus wheel is here. So what you actually have to do is you have to get your index finger right on top of that focus wheel, and there's a little tab here, see this little silver tab here. This you actually have to push down as you move the wheel, so it's in one motion, and your finger just slides over that tab and moves the wheel as it goes, and there you can see the lens is now turning back and forth as we move. You can turn the lens with your from the lens mount, that's entirely possible, or you can use this wheel here. You do need to use the so-called Contax grip for these cameras, so you have to have your index finger on top of the housing and the middle finger underneath the housing. Otherwise what happens is that most photographers will grab one of these and immediately put their finger over the rangefinder window, so you have to be quite careful of that. So you need to use the Contax grip, and that does take a little bit of getting used to, though it's by no means difficult. So that's focusing. To actually remove the lens is, well, quite a bit different than the Leica screw mount, because this is a bayonet mount. So what you do is you push down this metal coil, this piece of metal here. It's a sprung piece of metal. So you take your thumb and you push down, and then you simply turn the lens, and out it comes, and there's the lens. Now you can see that lens is quite different to the Jupiter that you may have seen on Leica models or Soviet Leica style cameras. It's the same lens, except the has a bayonet housing here, and it's, I think, a little more finely engineered. To put the lens back on, we have a line-up mark here with a red blob of paint, and we also have line-up marks here on the body, and so we just get that in there, and then once it's in place, we just turn until the spring locks, and then the lens is on. The engineering on these cameras is really, I've found to be very nice indeed. I don't have any experience of the Contax 2 models that they're based on. I've never used one. But the engineering is very, very nice. They are precision instruments. I'll show you the shutter sound. Lift it off the wooden desk there so it doesn't amplify. So this is the wind on. It's also the shutter speed selector, and like all Soviet cameras, we're advised not to change the speed until we've wound on. So here's the shutter firing, and it's a very, very, very quiet, perfect mechanical sound, beautiful sound. To change the shutter speed, again, we always wind on before we do that. The shutter speeds are engraved around the top edge of this collar here. Yeah, so they run from all the way from round here. B, the slowest automatic speed is half a second, unlike on the Leica clones, which have 1 second. top shutter speed on this later model is 1,000th of a second all the way around here. On the earlier models, such as this one, the top speed is 1/1250th of a second. I am, however, reliably informed by Kiev expert opinion that says the 1/1250th of a second top speed was always a slightly hit and miss affair. It was going to be somewhere in that vicinity, but not exactly on. However, these older models do have that higher speed in place of the 1,000th. So, to change the speeds, we simply wind on, which we've done. The speed indicator is actually on a flat cutout here. You may be able to see the little dot. It's currently pointing at 1,000th. So we'll change it to, let's go right the way around to 1/2 of a second. So there we are, that's at 1/2, and here we go. Lovely, lovely, lovely sound. It's got the mechanical clockwork mechanism inside there, as all the old cameras did for the slow speeds. Very, very nice indeed. I'll turn it back to 1,000th because I don't like keeping them on the low speeds. I've heard that can damage the springs, though I don't know how true that is. And there we go. Lovely. Just to compare, let's line both of them up. Neither is any more difficult than the other to turn. They're both very nice, easy mechanisms. So here, again, I'll lift it off the surface so you can hear without amplification. Click. And here also. So the sounds that they both make, they're separated by 15 years, but the sounds seem to me pretty much identical. Now, when I was much younger than I am now and making my first steps into rangefinder photography, I very, very much wanted to have one of the Russian rangefinders. I had my eye on a Zorki 4K. I eventually was given a Fed 4L, but I do remember the chap in Dixon's in the old photographic shop here in the UK showing us these brand new, at that time, Kiev cameras, and it's stuck in my mind ever since. That was my first sight of one of these cameras, and I remembered the clarity of the engraving, I remembered the quality of the construction and the overall very, very nice look and feel of the camera. And my understanding is that these were in the old Soviet times, these were considered a rather more professional, rather more hard-wearing piece of kit than the Leica clones, like the Feds and the Zorkis. Right, I'll show you what's inside. So we lift off the, we undo these two clips here. First of all, so lift up and undo. And then we just draw the back off. And inside we see, as well as the loose film spool, inside we see this remarkable device. This is a metal lathe shutter, and it runs from top to bottom, unlike the Feds and Zorkis, which run from side to side. So these are metal lathes. So it's a much more, I'm given to understand anyway, a much more complex mechanism than the Leica type shutter. Here it is on a slower speed. And I believe that they're very complex to repair if they go wrong. Fortunately, touch wood, these two both seem to be in good working order. And so that is one of the, for my money, that's one of the remarkable marvels of the mechanical age, is the Contax shutter. And do remember, these cameras are not copies in the same way that the Feds and the Zorkis were copies of the Leica. These cameras were made on the very tooling that was originally made in Germany by the Contax company on which to produce Contax 2 cameras. Let's pop the back on. And there's a button here. This is the rewind button that declutches the advance mechanism when you want to wind the film back. And so you simply hold that and wind the film back using this dial here. There is on the top a film counter, which you reset with a little wheel on the back here. So we'll reset that to 0. Again, everything beautifully mechanically made. And you'll see that dial turn very slowly, and it's now pointing at 1. So there we are. One problem that can arise on these is the frame spacing can go a little off. It seems to be, touch wood, it seems to be okay on these two. However, you can end up with frames on your negative that start quite wide at the beginning of the roll and get closer and closer together, and in the worst cases actually overlap each other. I suspect that's probably wear and tear on the drive mechanism. It can happen with these Kievs, that's one thing to be aware of. You will see this same camera with a little housing on top of here, built onto the top here. That is the light meter in the models with light meter. These don't have light meters, but the Kiev 4, as opposed to the 4A, has a little housing on the top here to house a light meter. Okay, light meters are very, very useful to have built into a camera, especially an old manual one like this, but they spoil the line of the camera, and I don't know, I would rather have something that's nicely styled and sacrifice that light meter personally, because I think they look so much better without. Prices: you can buy these cameras for, certainly here in the UK, somewhere between £40 and £60. The older they get, the more expensive they tend to be. The idea is that the ones made certainly in the late 40s and probably throughout the 50s were a little nearer to the original Contax product in terms of quality and so forth. I've never handled an earlier camera, so I can't tell. I can't give you any information about that, but certainly looking at these cameras, there is absolutely no lack in quality in either of these models. So unless you really, really want an old version of one of these, I would suggest that certainly anywhere up to the mid-70s you're going to be good with quality. Of course, they're all very old now. These are all old machines, and so many, even of the very newest ones, the most new ones, will be suffering some wear. Some will be more worn than others. But the received wisdom about these cameras, and I've no reason to differ with it, is that the models from the 40s, late 40s, early 50s are somewhat better in quality. So there we are, another lovely old entirely mechanical camera from our friends the Soviet photographic industry. Beautifully made, beautifully crafted, and just ready to do some photography, and indeed, if you should feel so inclined, some xenography with. And if you do find out what that is, then please do let me know. I'd be very anxious to find out myself. Once again, thank you very much indeed to everybody for tuning in and watching. Wishing you all the very best, and we'll be back soon for some more xenography as soon as we find out what that actually is. Bye bye for now.